I'm going to go ahead and get us going this morning. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our CRO from GovPath, Brian Weber. Brian, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Allison. Allison, my voice coming through good where everybody can hear me? Thumbs
Look
up,
great.
Sarah. All right. All right. Thank you, everybody who's joined today, and I'm sure there'll be a few that straggle in over the next 2 or 3 minutes. I'm very excited to be talking to Jess Marks Irving today. Jess Marks Irving is from San Mateo County. Her and I met through actually kind of a formal procurement process about 2 years ago when we got to know each other's style and approach through a series of quite a few Q&A meetings. I determined early on that Jess is really people first and has a tremendous weight that she carries to provide for her team. That's her goal utmost. And so I think that's part of what led her to GovPath. And today the listeners are going to hear Jess's perspective on why managed services, how it interacts with professional services simultaneously, and most importantly, what San Mateo County has received out of it to date and future state. And just for the listeners, you're going to hear a lot about the term sidekick, or there was a lot of advertising about sidekick. Sidekick is GovPath's managed services. We've rebranded it to something that's a little more memorable, a little less sterile than managed application services. And so you'll hear about Sidekick. And then please, again, ask questions either today or later on, as we will be sending all of this out to you through your GovPath relationships and email. So with that, I do want to introduce Jess Marks Irving. Jess, can you start telling the audience a little bit about yourself and your role at the county and the team you work with?
Of course. So I supervise the IT team for planning and building departments. So we support Acela as a huge part of what we do. We do support other things, but Acela is kind of our central focus. And I've been with the team a little bit longer than I've known Brian, so about 2.5 years. And that RFP, was in motion when I came on. So it was one of the first things that I worked on, which was an interesting place to come in, sort of time of change.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a welcome to the county sort of moment. And yeah, that was about 2 years ago. So I think the audience probably wants to hear a few things, kind of a before, a current, and then after. So from a before perspective, can you orient the group here before bringing on managed services? What was it like at the county? What was taking up most of your team's bandwidth?
Yeah. So I think none of this will be new. I think it's pretty familiar to a lot of jurisdictions, as I've heard more and more. Our Acela state was kind of uneven. We had an initial implementation that didn't go all that well, and then we had overhauled our building module entirely, and that was sort of more or less working, but lots of little things popping up here and there. And then we wanted to overhaul our planning module as well, because that hadn't been looked at in many years. So we were working with a vendor that was all sort of time and materials and very project focused, which was great for that building overhaul, and possibly was a good fit for that planning overhaul. But we had all of these little things that were piling up, and they were taking a really long time to get resolved, and they were very difficult to prioritize because everything had a dollar number attached to it. So when you're looking at spending hundreds of dollars to change a drop down, or and we were sort of going back and forth around priorities, which thing first, and we're spending a lot of time coordinating work and not as much time getting it over the finish line. At the same time, the internal team had gone through a good bit of training and had really upskilled from where they were. So we were really in a good place to really step in and provide more in-depth consultation on Acela, and really hone in on what the team needed, taking away a little bit of the need for that consultant role in some of what we do. certainly we still need it. We still need, best practices and really benefit from that knowledge, but we were kind of duplicating with that, with the team that was doing a lot of, hands-on consulting. So.
Yeah, and I could sense the nickel and diming type frustration, and I think it's important for the users to understand that you kind of have a bifurcated world right now, right? You've
Right.
got a building department that's in one state and a planning department that's in another state, and theoretically, the listeners could fill in the blank with certain departments. It may not be building or planning, but
Right.
you have two different worlds, right? That you're almost managing right now.
Yeah, we do. So the two primary, and then we support sustainability does some permitting through Acello. We support them as well as DPW. And both of those are also sort of in a state of haven't been touched for a long time. We want to put some more attention into them, but you know, have just been kind of lingering and doing what they do for a long time.
Yeah, and so talk to the listeners about being in between a third party, so a vendor, a partner,
Mhm.
and your team, your users, your staff. Like that, I could see that you could almost get stuck there. And so, what did that look like in practice?
Yeah, I mean, in practice, it looked like a lot of playing telephone back and forth. That we would be asking our staff questions, then trying to bring it to the vendor, then they would have different questions and go back. There's a lot of back and forth, a lot of hanging out in the middle. And when folks got frustrated at each other, it was us, sort of sitting in the middle of that frustration, which can be a really difficult place. And again, I don't think is unique to San Mateo in any way, shape, or form, or even permitting, but it was a lot of managing those frustrations about unknown timelines. When is this going to happen? What do we need to do? Staff would think they had provided information. The vendor would think it wasn't enough information. And we were really doing a lot of managing that relationship in a lot of ways that wasn't a direct relationship. But
Yeah, you can easily spend when you have a third party that's in a T&M contract to do what it was that your team needed, you can spend
Mhm.
as much time managing the back and forth as actually defining requirements for the work. So,
Right.
what was the trigger point? Like, when did you realize you needed a support model that was different? The current support model with the other third party wasn't sustainable, and that you were really looking for something more predictable.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, it wasn't something that I wasn't actively seeking a managed services model at all. I'm very familiar with that. I come from an IT consulting world and have worked in MSPs. So like I understand the model, but it wasn't something that had occurred to me as, oh, this is what we need. But when those RFPs came in and we're interviewing everyone, we really kept sort of seeing some of the specters of those same challenges pop up, that we were, okay, so this wouldn't really change how we're working. This would be a little bit the same, and so when we looked at managed services and saw like, okay, here's this opportunity to really define this piece of our work that our team is capable of really, stepping in and defining requirements. And what we need on the other side is a really reliable implementation, and really reliable, sort of price tag, and not having to like manage budget like super as carefully as we were. And that started to sound like a really good fit for where we were at when we saw GovPath's proposal. Certainly, we still had a lot of questions and a lot of details to take a look at, but we started to sort of think about like, hey, how could we use this to shift a little bit of where we're at, and start moving forward a little more.
Yeah, you had a unique position. I travel the country a lot, meeting with our current customers and prospects, and a lot of that would be one-on-one conversations. You were in a situation where you were comparing multiple proposals, so to speak, at the
Yeah.
same time. And I remember determining through your questions to GovPath that ours was something different. There was a structure there, or a programmatic discipline that maybe was refreshing, and also that weren't included in some of the others. So as you were going through that deliberation process, when you started to actually consider it as a structured subscription managed services, to be honest, I'm sure you had some concerns and hesitations. Can you share some of those with the group?
Oh, absolutely. I think anyone who's worked with an MSP, or certainly if you've worked with multiple MSPs, you have seen good, bad, and ugly. MSPs have, I'm using that, sorry, acronym, but any managed service provider has a incentive to be able to take more money in from your subscription than they're spending on the staff time that they provide. And that can be a really, and that's true for consulting too, to a certain extent, but that can be a place where you'll see people either define scope, more narrowly than it appears at first, so that, when you actually start filing tickets, it's, oh, that's out of scope. Oh, that's out of scope. Or you could see, just sort of like very little, resources spent on tier one support, so that you're, sending in tickets and getting kind of like, the classic would be like the did you reboot response, which I'm not sure what that would be for Acela, but some version of that, and going back and forth. So in order to like actually escalate and get the level of service that you need. So those were things that I was really looking out for, because I certainly didn't want to, especially signing a multi-year contract and really, committing um, to a vendor and a model. You don't want to get into that and go like, oh no, like this really is, isn't working, because we're not getting what we need from it. Um, so yeah, there were concerns. Not gonna lie.
Oh, I
So,
mean, I hear concerns. I've heard probably 3 or 4 dozen different concerns and or objections throughout the last 3 years or so, that our Sidekick program has become more and more formal. And I do sense we're unique in the marketplace, with it being a subscription that's SLA based, around response and resolution time. It's funny you mentioned, the classic IT response. Did you reboot? For the listeners, everyone knows Excel is about as far from an iPhone reset as possible. And unfortunately, there's no easy button there. Okay, so appreciate you building up the storyline from here. So what convinced you that GovPath was the right partner? What convinced you that, because if I remember, we had 3, 4 lengthy presentations and Q&As and so forth.
mhm.
What did you hear that alleviated those concerns?
Yeah, California procurement processes. Sorry about that. Um, but yeah, there's a few things that I really look for when I'm looking really for any partner, but especially in, managed services. One is just that their responses are tailored to you. A lot of times with sort of like if you've got kind of a big, very standardized model, you'll see a proposal that you can tell is the same proposal that they send to everybody else. It's not responding to the specific things that are in your RFP. And it looks a little copy and paste. So that's something I look for. I look for that, responses are tailored, that they really address the things that you said, in your RFP, and same, sort of in an interview, that you're getting a genuine response, as opposed to, oh, this is the answer I always give no matter what question is asked, kind of vibe. And the other is willingness to challenge ideas. So I really value in any partner, I know what I think, I know what I'm asking for. I'm not looking for someone to just say yes all the time. I'm looking for someone to share their expertise with us. And I'm looking for someone to help me define what best practice is, or, share ideas from other clients or other jurisdictions that might have similar challenges. So that was something that I really appreciated about GovPass presentations. There were a number of times where, we would put out a question and they would say something like, well, that's not exactly how we would usually approach that, but here's what we would do. And as much as I want someone to, be able to, respond to exactly what I want in certain situations, I really want that challenge as well. And yeah, then just, it's the nuts and bolts of, reviewing the scope, reviews the SLAs. You mentioned SLAs, that's really important. If I am paying a flat fee, I want to know exactly how long you expect my tickets to go back and forth, and see, indications that those are real as far as a company expectation that that's actually happening. Um, and look at the scope, see, where things are defined. We actually went back, and one of our partner departments, was really had a lot of questions about, like, oh, if we go through with this model, what how much of our work would be in scope. And so I went back through a year of their requests and tickets, and looked at the GovPath scope and looked at those tickets, and I was like, look, I can't guarantee it, but here's my gut, sort of sense of what would be in scope and what would not. And what that might look like in terms of spend. And to be fair, we've actually been really pleasantly, more has been in scope than we anticipated. So that has been great. But it was something that an exercise we did to just sort of see, like, okay, are we gonna find ourselves paying that like hourly rate all the time anyway?
Yeah, and I think to clarify for the listeners, I'm gonna slightly audible
Yeah.
here, Jess, and also for the listeners, if you have questions, please feel free to insert them in the chat. We're doing great on time, so we will have time to get to some questions most likely towards the end of this. So I think it's important, Jess, if you want to explain a bit of the structure, that you have actually two distinctly different GovPath teams working side by side for the planning department, which is an implementation, and professional services, re-implementation, and the managed services SideKick, right, for building. So can you
Right.
explain a bit of that structure, and how does it equal a copacetic world for you that's seamless?
Yeah. Well, I mean, seamless is always a little optimistic, but it's pretty close. We are working, like I said, on that planning re-implementation. That work is being done by a project team that's amazing. We meet with them multiple times a week, for check-ins on progress, and they're really working on sort of a goal-based. We are trying to accomplish a scope of work, a more traditional, like, big release approach. In addition, we had this building module, and then, our other partner departments, DPW and sustainability, that we still need to make changes for. We still have work to do for them. Something might happen where, right now we're updating our fee schedules. There's going to be changes, and, oh, we need to know what color the roofs are now, and we didn't need to know that before, whatever it is. And so those kinds of requests we're taking in a different way, as opposed to just taking them to that same team and kind of diluting that project work. We're working with the managed services team on those tickets. So it really allows us to keep our work focused in the lane that is the right lane. It's like, are we working on that project? Are we, sort of going forward in this, goal oriented way? Or are we, looking at those sort of like break fix, continuous improvement? Let's make the iterate. We have that chunk of work that we're working on with a different team. And then, we haven't had this happen too much, but, if we do need to take something from managed services, if it's, just too big, too complex, and, we want to make a bigger change, we do have the ability. We have another contract for, sort of open-ended professional services. So we're kind of covered everywhere for what we might need to do. And what it allows us to do is really focus.
I appreciate that. Yeah, dedicated personnel from GovPath that,
Yeah,
that are beginning
absolutely.
to really know who you and your team are.
Yeah, that's been
Um,
great.
so once you started on this SideKick journey, what changed first? Like, what did you start seeing from an evolution perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that we really was really a big change for us was that GovPath works on regular monthly releases. So there's a very predictable put in tickets, test, and then, things are released to production on a monthly schedule. And that was something that we had been kind of all over the place for a long time in terms of, how long is this going to take? When is it moving to production? Has it moved to production yet? And so that regular reliable implementation and those regular releases were a huge shift in the way we were working. And it was really positive. It allowed us to, send out, we send out monthly release notes, which GovPath team sends regular release notes to us. We make some edit to those for so a little more, color on the purpose and, relationship to staff's work, and then send them out to our staff so they can see that, regular rhythm of work and regular rhythm of things being improved in the system. And it allowed us to think about how we were taking in tickets and how we were taking in concerns. So we had more with that just sort of reliability on the implementation side and spending a lot less time in the communication back and forth. So we're just like, hey, we've dialed down requirements. Here's where it is. Do it, get it back, more or less. And we were able to start meeting with within planning and building. We're meeting with every sort of division or working group. So we're meeting with inspections and, seeing what they need for their group and taking a look at their requests. We're meeting with the permit services and what's going on with permit processing. And we just started meeting with code compliance. We're meeting with them to sort of see what's going on with them and what changes they need. So it allowed us to really focus in on those teams, especially the ones that kind of hadn't gotten a lot of ear time, a lot of airtime with the whatever squeakiest wheel approach that we had of just, sort of digging through a big backlog of tickets. And that's been hugely positive that we're able to do that.
That's a good analogy that I'm sure the listeners can relate to, which is the squeaky wheel, kind of who squeaks the loudest in a non-structured managed services environment gets attention. That's a good way to summarize a lot of what I've seen in practice. And I've been in this space for 15 years at a variety of functions. So I think what's unique is we'll see something at San Mateo County, and it's a movie we've seen elsewhere, at least 80%, right? So from a best practice perspective, you mentioned when we start getting into the doing together, you didn't say the word challenge or pushback, but I'll say that, like we say, actually, that's not the best way to do it, or have you considered another approach, which doesn't often happen. I mean, I know of plenty of third parties that simply like to you say jump, I say how high sort of thing, because it works through a contract. And we definitely appreciate challenging status quo to a degree, and because ultimately we are on the line to drive sustainability and supportability long term for you at San Mateo County. So you now have a lot of visibility into those tickets and the progress of the tickets. For the listeners, SideKick comes with a monthly governance or steering committee that a lot of those SLAs are managed, and there's a lot of proactive dialogue and slash tweaking of the solution that can happen. So therefore, what does it look like in practice to have that visibility, and also what's coming next from a governance perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. I want to jump back to what you were saying just a second ago, if that's okay. One of the things that we really noticed about the issues we were having, and I think this, again, I don't think this is unique, is that a lot of them really trace to that how high model, whether it was, sort of from the IT team's perspective. Well, we asked staff how the system should be, and they told us, and then we did it, and now you're mad at us because it's that way. And same, with the vendor, that, those sort of like unquestioned, response, unquestioned requirements or like non-examined requirements was really a key part of what was broken. So it was with you saying that, it just really resonated with me that that's a lot of why I was so focused on finding someone that would really speak up on those things. Uh, okay, so sorry, I was focused on that.
Not a
Repeat
problem.
your next
Yeah,
question was about
governance. So
governance. Yes.
Sidekick also comes with this monthly governance
Mhm.
aspect that really hones in on that visibility. It's not like you have no idea what our team's doing.
Yes.
There's a transparency aspect of
Mhm.
not only looking past in the past, but looking forward. What's that enabled your team to do?
Yeah, well, it's been really helpful. So we have access to ticketing platform. My entire team has access to any other ticket in the organization, so we can very easily see what's in process and what's been requested. We also are having regular, I think every 2 weeks, we're having a solution committee meeting with our managed services team, which, is really reviewing what's in the queue, what's slated for the next release, and also gives a really good time for those sort of like heads up kind of conversations like, oh, hey, we've got these fee updates coming up, or we're hearing noise that we might need to make a change, on this, workflow. So it gives us a chance on both sides to sort of talk through, what might be needed coming ahead, which is really helpful. It gives your team a chance to say, oh, okay, for that, what I'll really need to know is X, Y, Z. And then we can, go ahead and make sure that we have that for when it's time to move forward. And it gives our team a lot of visibility into how your team is working, which is really, really has been great. That we haven't had any real times where we've need to challenge that or say like, oh, hey, like I need you to prioritize this. But it is very comforting to know that we have a lot of transparency into what's happening behind the scenes, and that, if we did need to say like, oh, hey, like this really needs to be reprioritized or something like that, it would be very easy and quick to communicate that.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, I think that to all the listeners, whoever your partner is, transparency shouldn't be feared. It is something to be embraced, and third parties such as GovPath embrace transparency. And I think it's expected. I like to tell everyone there's never been a riskless project I've been associated with ever. It's just about how do you have communication channels established from a stakeholdership perspective, and the mitigation points to walk through those communications channels, right? It's about how do you handle risk and decision
Right.
points, not is there risk. So okay, we're gonna jump to what I'm sure the listeners really want to know, which is, so tell me about some things that you like, some results, right? So how can you have any examples of projects or priorities that you've now been able to focus on with the support that you weren't able to focus on before?
Yeah, well, a lot of it really has to do with sort of those change request meetings that I was mentioning. But it's a really bigger shift. When I came in to planning and building, and a lot of sort of more traditional software release environments where you're doing these big releases and then no changes can really be made. This is the way the system is designed. And unless it's broken, we're not going to address it kind of mindset. And that was not working, in terms of staff's experience, that there were a lot of, things that were fixable. People would complain to me about the way the system worked, and I'd be like, we can change that. Like that's changeable. um, but those things weren't getting addressed and weren't getting changed because there wasn't a structured way to take them in. There wasn't an ability to like manage those requests. So instead, people were being told like, oh, we can't do that unless we take on a big project. Um, so we were really already kind of working on shifting that mentality a little bit, but we needed the structure in order to make really meaningful change. So we had, gotten to a point where we were taking in, a lot more of those changes, but we hadn't it was very difficult to operationalize turning them back around, which is some ways worse. Um, but hadn't made that progress. And now, I think before GovPath and the managed services, we were releasing maybe a few, updates a month, and mostly pretty break fix, like, this notification wasn't going out and we fixed it. And now we're releasing, probably, I went back and looked through release notes, and it's probably about 15, a month that we're releasing. And it's a really good mix of, forward-looking changes, break fix, something that we expected to work isn't working anymore, we fixed it. And things that are, improvements or sort of forward-looking changes. And that it's great to see.
That's fantastic to hear. And in my travels, I find there is a spectrum of the level of, let's call it, siloedness between IT and the business. In some jurisdictions, they're hand in glove. In other jurisdictions, there's even ordinances that make that very difficult because of potentially decentralized IT to where there's a cost share aspect among the different departments. What I'm curious, well, I should say this. However, the commonality is that usually IT arrives at the decision that they need a Sidekick managed services program before the business, usually. So how has this at San Mateo County, how has Sidekick changed the relationship between IT and the departments that you support?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely changed, and I definitely there was some I think IT had a stronger sense of, sort of needing to make a change there than the rest of the business. I think that's accurate. Um, I see a lot more of the, sort of same team mentality. I'm not going to say it's perfect. It's not, we're still, working on building those relationships and, working on, sort of getting to a place where people feel like, it's fast enough because, it's never fast enough. But we're hearing a lot more. Thank you. We're hearing a lot more, oh, I'm sure instead of someone coming with us and being like, I know you're not going to do anything about this, but I just want to rant at you. We're hearing a lot more like, oh, hey, like, it seems like this might be something we can change. And, so we're hearing a lot more, the vibe is much more collaborative. I know vibe isn't very scientific, but it is a lot more collaborative as we've been able to like really, deliver on the implementation side, which has been great. I feel like I've said that a lot, but it has been.
It's certainly been refreshing from our perspective as well, and growing together. I mean, for the listeners, our relationship now is 2 years to approaching 2.5 years, and moving into the third renewal later this year of Sidekick. So I think you're now like moving into the sequel. If this was a movie, right? You like lived this movie, you had the before, the plot line, the after, and you're into like the sequel. For those listening that are just starting your original movie, where you were a few years ago, if that's resonating with them, what advice would you give them at this point?
Yeah.
Other than breathe.
Stay strong, breathe. First one. But yeah, I think really a lot of something that you said earlier around, don't be afraid of transparency, or don't be afraid of, looking at issues. I think that is something that when the issues are really piled up, or there's been, sort of and I wouldn't say San Mateo was ever confrontational or anything. It wasn't like, but there was some sense of historical, like we're not really quite sure IT is on the same page. That can be really challenging. And the best thing I think you can do is really open up, is really sort of like make sure you have an avenue for, people to send in, sort of feedback and requests if you don't have a clear avenue and they're getting lost in like random Teams messages or emails. And make sure that you are, going to some of those, meetings where people are talking about, the actual work being done in the system, and, can you give yourself an opportunity to hear what's happening in the divisions and respond to it. And I think that it there's a natural inclination to kind of shut that down a little bit because it's like, oh, that's out of our scope. We don't have, we don't have the funds to make that change or whatever. And I think when you're in that state where things need to change but haven't changed yet, first step is really listening. It's probably the hardest one, but it's really important, and you can't get anywhere until you understand where people want to go.
I like that. I coach my team, which I think is the antithesis of like salespeople out there, but you're given two ears and one mouth for a reason. So leverage those two ears. Okay, so now we're gonna play a bit of an audible, and so I'm gonna bring up two or three concerns, Jess, that I've heard from other customers around the country, some of which are on this call, some that aren't. When we're early in the movie, that they may have around moving to a subscription managed services model, and so I'm just going to give you the opportunity to respond to that concern based off being 2 years plus into this model. Does that work for you?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first one I hear is, well, managed services will replace our staff in IT, and we need to protect our headcount and or knowledge base. How would you respond to that based off what you've experienced?
I think that I don't know what the staff in question looks like, so it's hard to say, but I do think that in general, it's augmenting, it's not replacing. I mean, that has allowed us to go deeper into the, sort of subject matter expert, because we're not working on that sort of, what's the quickest fix, what's the, sort of most efficient way to turn this around. We're able to offload some of that. So then we're able to like spend a lot of time in that building requirements and really knowing, sort of the technical ins and outs of the system. If anything, I think we're more necessary to the work. And it allows us to build that like deep knowledge of our staff, our processes, our needs, that isn't replaceable. It's not. So
Yeah, that's perfect. For the audience out there, there's tools that we use to various degrees across different customer bases. But if you've heard or can Google the tool Loom or ScribeHow, these are screen share video captures that we embrace technology now and provide that for a training set. These are written documentation leveraging AI, video screen capture that is part of handovers and knowledge transfer to really help facilitate that partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Another question or comment I hear, Jess, is, well, I only use a partner for complex items. The most technically complex. I don't think this program's for me because I only use a partner for what would be the most challenging item. You may have been there in your mindset or have experienced that in the past. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we had been, like I said, we'd been upskilling the team and training the team. And so there was, a sense to which I kind of wanted them to be able to still, have their hands on the system and keep learning and keep, and also, sort of the pivot, like the ability to make a change very quickly as opposed to, submitting a ticket, which is also pretty quick, but yeah, in this concern. I think that what I found is that even though a lot of things are quote unquote simple, they're extremely time consuming. You might have the same, sort of process, you need to update a fee schedule with 100 fees on it. Yeah, my team can do that, but that's not the best use of their time. So, it's something that really those things that are not necessarily technically complex, but that are very, very time consuming has been a place where we've found a lot of utility in using managed services or, sort of having a partner do that, because they might have better tools to do it they might, I'm sure they do. They have ways of doing it that they've done it 100 times before, that you can very quickly get them the information and they can complete it, where it might take you, a couple of days of tinkering through it. And that really frees us up to do more specific, more highly skilled work, to be honest.
That's I'm talking about upskilling and driving efficiency amongst your team. That's great. As it relates to the entry of tickets, so for the listeners, essentially San Mateo County, you would define the requirements and what success looks like, right? What's criteria for success or desired outcome, and we treat that like a spec form and run to completion. I've heard a lot of customers say it will take a lot of time to define those requirements, or that's why I'll just do it ourselves. Can you explain maybe an initial learning curve and how long did it take to master, and now what does it look like?
I think in our case, we had been kind of working on some of those things anyway, and because we had found that in going through the work, we found that there were a number of things that were not well documented about the way the system was set up now, or had been documented, but in such a way that it was hard to find the information. So it was something that we were thinking about and talking about anyway, is like, how do we organize and document our requirements and also communicate them between divisions? Because a lot of times we were finding that changes we were making one place was affecting another division. So we were finding there was a lot of utility in being able to define and document those things anyway. I wouldn't say there was a huge learning curve with, defining requirements for GovPath, and also most things, it's not that complicated. If it was, I think if it was so complicated that it was really time onerous, we would take a look at, okay, do we need to, how do we need to approach this? Is now a project that we need to, dedicate internal time. But for the vast majority of things, it's just not that onerous, and it's work that has a lot of utility for us anyway.
I appreciate that color commentary. Thank you. And I'm going to just check, see if there's any other questions. Looks like we are good. So I certainly appreciate your time, Jess. I know the whole group does too. If there are questions that other people want to ask offline, the chat will stay open, so please feel free to send them. We will send this recording out, as well as any information on SideKick. Please make sure to ask your sales director or your professional services team for more information. We're happy to share. Really want to thank Jess Marks Irving and San Mateo County. We went through a very formal process of getting to know one another, and now we couldn't be happier of how the partnership has evolved, and we're moving into the sequel, if not part 3. From a closing perspective, GovPath, we are on the road with user groups. So we have had a Southern California and a Northern California user group, and we are moving across the country. So we will be in the Florida market in the Southeast on April 28th. Emails have gone out, and then in the Colorado Rocky Mountain area on June 2nd in Adams County, Colorado. We will be able to answer SideKick questions or business process review or anything else you may have. But for that, Jess, I know you have a very busy day job, so thank you very much for taking this time and sharing your thoughts on what would be an important investment for the county. I'm sure the value has paid off, and most importantly, it sounds like the way you defined pain earlier on has been resolved. And now you're looking into like downshifting in terms of what do you do next to that next level of evolution. So I appreciate our partnership. Thank you for everyone, and we'll give you guys 15 minutes back. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Brian.